internet! Today I'm here to do my wrap up for the month of October and November. I kind of mentioned this in my last video, but I kind of disappeared from YouTube for a little bit because I moved and then a bunch of other stuff came up and happened and I just didn't have a chance to film anything. So I missed my October wrap up. So I'm doing 2 months in one in this little wrap up video. It's almost like a whole fall wrap up thing. But I have a lot of books to talk about, so I'm gonna keep the intro short. I read 6 books in October and 4 books in November for a total of 10 books in this wrap up, and some of my absolute favorite books of the year I read in those last 2 months. So I've been dying to talk about them, and I kind of have on Instagram. If you don't follow me on there, shameless plug, but I'm ready to like talk about them. So let's get into it. The very first book that I read in October was Undead Girl Gang by Lily Anderson. This is a YA kind of contemporary fantasy-ish novel. It's about this Wiccan named Mila who basically is really upset because her best friend has supposedly committed suicide, and Mila does not believe that her friend committed suicide. So she decides to find a spell that will bring her friend back from the dead, and she accidentally brings back 2 other girls who recently died from her school. It was a lot of fun. I really like Lily Anderson's writing. I'll be honest, it's been a hot minute since I've read this one, so I don't remember like all of my detailed thoughts, but I remember really enjoying it. There were parts of it that were a little too high school drama for my taste. That's something I unfortunately struggle with sometimes now when it comes to YA, and this book did have that issue for me, but it wasn't so annoying that it hindered my enjoyment. I really liked the main character. I liked the shenanigans that the girls got up to as basically zombies, and it was almost kind of like a murder mystery, kick-ass zombie gang type of book, and I loved it. It was perfect for October. I will also point out that Rebecca Soler, who is one of my favorite audiobook narrators, does the audiobook for this book, and it was great. So I loved the audiobook, but I ended up giving Undead Girl Gang 4.5 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was the perfect October read. Perfect way to start off the month. So if you were following my wrap-ups for the last few months and you've stuck around, first of all, thank you, but you'll also know that I've been rereading the Throne of Glass series to prepare for the final book that came out in October, which was Kingdom of Ash. So in October, I was continuing on with that reread, and that was kind of my main priority as far as the physical books I was reading. I was still listening to audiobooks, but as far as the physical books go, it was pretty much Throne of Glass all the way. So I kicked off my first physical book of October with my reread of Empire of Storms, which is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series. Now when I first read this book, I actually gave it 4.5 stars because Queen of Shadows was my favorite book in that series, and this just couldn't top it. But after rereading it, I think I enjoyed it a lot more. I got a little more into the story. I don't know if it was because I was binge reading them back to back or what it was, but I enjoyed this book a lot more the second time than I did when I first read it, which was back when it came out like 2 years ago. The ending destroyed me just like it did the first time, and I actually ended up raising my rating to 5 stars for this one. I'm gonna go ahead and say this now because I got 2 other Throne of Glass books to talk about in this, but the Throne of Glass series is basically about this assassin named Selena who has been in this like awful prison. Then one day the crown prince shows up and he's like, hey, my father's having this competition for his own personal assassin. Everybody in his court needs a champion. I want you to be mine. She goes. Way more happens after that. That's basically how the series starts out. It's one of my favorite series. It definitely has some problematic elements. I adore the series, like I said. I ended up raising my rating for this to 5. And I'm gonna quit gushing about it now because I got way more books to get into. So the next book I completed was actually another reread for me, but it was on audio, and that was A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the 2nd book in her Shades of Magic trilogy, which is probably my 2nd favorite series of all time, and I've been rereading them. So I listened to this on audio. I thought the audiobook was great. This series, the first book is A Darker Shade of Magic. It is about this guy, Kel, who has this very strange coat, and he has this weird, rare ability where he is able to travel in between worlds or like dimensions, kind of, and he ends up meeting this thief named Delilah Bard, and chaos ensues. It's one of my all-time favorite series. Victoria Schwab is my favorite author. But I will say, this book is my least favorite of the three. I feel like this book drags a lot in the middle, and even rereading it on audio, I still felt that way. Knowing what I know about how, like, the overall series, since I've read all the books, I think that I still enjoyed it more than I did the first time, but I still am sticking with my rating of 4 stars for this one, just because the middle does drag a bit, but the ending is like a major, like, amazing cliffhanger. So if you ever struggle with this book a little bit, push through it because it's so worth it. Yeah, like I said, I gave this one 4 stars, 4 out of 5, and I still love this book, even though it's my least favorite of the 3. So the next book is actually one that I read for Spookathon, and it's the only book that I completed during Spookathon. I did start another one and finish it later, which I'll talk about later. That book was City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. So this is Victoria's, one of her newest books. She came out with 2 books this year, but this is one of the 2, and it is a middle grade story. It's about this girl named Cassidy who has this ability to see ghosts ever since she almost died around a year or so before. Funnily enough, her parents have this book series that they write about, like, thriller, mystery, ghost type stories, and they have recently acquired their own reality show. And so Cassidy and her parents travel to Scotland for the first episode of the reality show, where there are a lot of ghosts and a lot of crazy things happen in this short little book. I really liked this. Even though it's middle grade and Victoria had to kind of dial down her creep factor that everybody loves it so much, there was still a good enough amount in this book to still make it very much Victoria Schwab and very much her style and her aesthetic even. But it was definitely dialed down. I just, you know, since it is middle grade and it's for that kind of audience, but it was still just like this really creepy, weird little book, and I loved it. It was fun. It had really interesting characters. I really loved the ghost character Jacob. I thought he was hilarious, and I really liked the concept of threads in this book and the way kind of like the whole ghost seeing thing works, the way that I haven't read a book where it worked exactly like this before. The only thing is I wish that there had been a little bit more backstory, and I realize that middle grade books aren't supposed to be as long, but I would have liked a little more backstory. I'm hoping we get more of that in book 2. But that was really my only downside to this, is I wish it had just been a little bit longer, because it felt very, like, rushed in places. Which I feel like that is probably just because of it being middle grade. I haven't really read enough middle grade to know, other than, like, Harry Potter and Rick Riordan's books, which I feel like, since they're series, it's a little different, which this will eventually be a series. This is only the first book. I'm jumping ahead. I enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. So bear with me, because the next book that I read is my favorite book of the year. It is my favorite standalone book of all time, and I already want to read it again. It was amazing. I still think about it. And that book is 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I was really afraid that the hype around this book was going to deter me from liking it, but I absolutely loved it. I think it's totally worth all of the hype it's getting. This is an adult story about this journalist named Monique who has gotten the opportunity basically to write Evelyn Hugo's biography. Evelyn Hugo is a very famous actress who is a bit older now, and she's basically going to tell Monique her life story so that she can write her biography for her after she passes away. The thing is, though, that even though Evelyn has been married 7 times to 7 husbands, the true love of her life is not one of those 7 husbands. I don't want to spoil it, but I feel like it is kind of a known thing that this book falls under the LGBTQ plus spectrum, as Evelyn is bisexual. I loved it so much. I will say I don't believe that this book is own voices, but I thought the bisexual representation was fantastic. There were some really, really great lines in here, and just Evelyn as a character was just so captivating, and she definitely was flawed, but I think that she just read like this human, flawed, realistic person. Like, I felt like I was reading about a real person. I cried a lot especially like within the last like 150 pages. I cried a lot. I haven't read a book in a long time that really like struck a deep chord in me the way this one did. Like, I felt as I was listening to it that I knew that this was going to be a favorite book of mine, and that I didn't know it would be the favorite book, but I knew it would be a favorite book of mine. I don't know, I just had this like immediate connection to it in a way that I don't even really know how to describe. But if those of you watching have a favorite book, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful story. It's really well written. I haven't read Taylor Jenkins Reid before, but now I want to go back and read everything she's ever written. It's heartbreaking. There are some trigger warnings for this book. There is some historical context homophobia, as a good chunk of this book takes place in like the 50s and 60s. There is I would put a trigger warning for suicide, domestic abuse, and depression for this book as well. So if any of those things are hard for you to read about, be aware of that. But I loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I wish I could give it 1,000,000 out of 5 stars. If you're hesitant to pick this book up because of the height, I encourage you to give it a chance. It's really great. I also thought the audiobook was really good. It had 3 different narrators. There was one for Monique, one for Evelyn, and then one that read like basically the tabloids that are scattered throughout the book and the newspaper articles. And I thought that was a really neat way to do the audiobook. Read this book. I'm gonna stop now because this video is getting way too long. Okay, so the last book I read in October was Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas, which is probably not a surprise. So this was actually my first time reading Tower of Dawn. I did not read it when it first came out. I was very hesitant about this book as it is the first Throne of Glass book that does not follow the main character, but instead follows another character, Kale. And I was a little unsure about this because of the fact that Kale is disabled and I didn't really know how the rep was gonna go. I have read some Own Voices reviews and most of them are positive, so I think that that's great. But I will say, without going into the spoilers, that this book took me a while to read. I liked this book. I really did. I enjoyed it. I enjoy being back in this world no matter where it is. I enjoy being in this world no matter who I'm following or whatever. But I struggled with a lot of it. I felt like it was way unnecessarily longer than it needed to be. This book is barely shorter than Empire of Storms, and it didn't need to be, in my opinion. I did like how this book kind of went back to its roots of the series, where it didn't really rely on the magic so much. There was magic, like healing magic and things like that, but it was not like every character you read about has magic and they're doing all these like cool things with it. So I enjoyed that, and there wasn't really, you know, Fae in this book either, which, not that that's a critique, but it was nice kind of going back, feeling like I was going back to the roots of where this series began. I really, really liked Irene's character. We first meet her in The Assassin's Blade, and I really, really liked her character and where her character went. And I started to like Kale again, because in Queen of Shadows, I really started to dislike him a lot. Whereas when I first started the series, he was one of my favorites, but this book made me like him again. So that was great. There is a lot of important information in this book. There's this huge plot twist that basically changes the entire course for the last book. I knew that there was something that was going to happen because everybody kept saying, oh, you have to read it, something important happens, you gotta read it, you gotta read it. But I did not think it would be that. And if you read this, you know what I'm talking about. But like I said, I liked this book. It was just way too long. It could have probably been cut in half, or maybe at least a third of it could have been cut off, and it would have been just fine. I would have probably preferred it because it was just kept going on and on and on. Because of that, I ended up only giving it 4 stars. Not that 4 stars is a bad rating, but considering all of the other books in the series are 5 stars for me, this is definitely my least favorite. I thought there were good things and bad things about the disability rep personally, but as again, I'm not disabled, so take that part to mean what you will. That was just kind of my perception of it. That's really all I have to say. So we're gonna move on. So I kicked off the month of November by finishing up a book that I started for Spookathon but didn't finish because I think I had to get the audiobook twice because I ran out of time to listen to it. But that book was Hunting Prince Dracula by Carrie Maniscalco. This is the second book in the Stalking Jack the Ripper series. And in this one we follow Audrey, Rhodes, and Thomas to this, like, school, basically. That's all I'm really going to say about it, because spoilers. But I feel like that's a fairly well-known plot point. I liked Stalking Jack the Ripper, but it wasn't, like, amazing. And I liked this book, but again, it wasn't, like, amazing. I did learn that listening to these books on audio isn't a great way to consume them, so lesson learned for when I read the next book. I will not be listening to the audiobook. Not that it was bad, but I zoned out a lot. I'm not gonna lie. And I feel like I didn't grasp as much of the story as I would have liked to. With that being said, I enjoyed this book. I really love the banter between Audrey, Rose, and Thomas. That's always a fun thing to read. I felt kind of meh about the Dracula angle. Like, I get it, but it was a little cheesy some of the times, in my opinion, especially considering who they decided to tie Dracula to. But I'm not gonna say anything beyond that. Just that I wasn't a huge fan of that aspect of the book. But I thought the story was really interesting nonetheless. I'm excited to read the next book. And I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I completed in November was a reread for me, and that is Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake. So this book is the first book in a series. Like I said, it was a reread for me. It's one of my favorites. It's about these 3 queens who are triplets, and they are basically separated when they're children around like 6 years old and raised separately, and in this world, when the triplet queens are born, once they reach the age of 16, they have a year to kill each other off, basically. And whoever survives gets to be the next queen. I decided to reread this book because I realized when I wanted to read the 3rd book, I didn't remember enough from the first 2 books to warrant reading the 3rd book yet, because it just came out a few months ago. So I decided to reread the first 2 books before picking up the 3rd book, and I've been listening to the audiobooks. I like the narrator a lot. I don't know if I would like the narrator if it was the first time I was reading these, but since I already am like familiar with the story, even if I don't remember everything, familiar enough with it, she's fine. I think I enjoyed this book just as much as I did the first time. I thought it was really intense. I love all 3 of the queens. In this book, it's really hard to pick a favorite. In my opinion, I really couldn't. Now, I'm in the middle of the 2nd one now, and I remember a lot less about that one than I did this one. But all 3 of the queens are very captivating. There are some very unlikable characters in this book, however. But I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars once again. I'm really enjoying it. The book we've all been waiting for. The one that I have alluded to have read, but have not talked about yet. Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. I spent pretty much the entire month reading this, because it was so long that it took me 3 weeks to read it. Not because I didn't enjoy it, but because it's 980 pages. And I loved every single page. It was fantastic. I can't talk a whole lot about this without getting into spoilers. I haven't decided if I'm going to do a spoiler video on this book yet, but holy shit, guys. It was really good. I really loved the way that this tied together the storylines between Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. I thought she did a really good job tying those together. It was long, but unlike Tower of Dawn, it didn't feel unnecessarily long. Like, everything that happened in this book felt like it needed to happen. It didn't feel like anything was dragging. There's just a lot of characters, and that's why I think it is so long. It's because we had to be able to end up tying all of those storylines together to get to, like, the big final battle, basically. I thought it was great. I really love the series. This was a really, really great ending. Like, I feel like, as far as endings go, this one was very, very solid and very well done. Obviously, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It did make me cry a couple times. There were a lot of, like, feel moments. If you've read this and you want to talk about it, shoot me a DM on Instagram. And the very last book I read in November was Zenith by Sasha Alsberg and Lindsay Cummings. I've been meaning to read this. I've been very curious to read it. I wanted to support Sasha and Lindsay as another booktuber, even though I don't know them, but I wanted to support them because I think it's great that they were able to write this together. I had heard a lot of mixed reviews about it, mostly not so great ones, so I was very, very hesitant going into this book. I went in with low expectations. I had also heard that there were a lot of weird editing choices made in this book, so I went with the audiobook. I think that was a good way to go because I thought the audiobook was pretty well done. It had a full cast, and I thought that that part was really great. So there are some strange lines in this one. There are a few strange things that happen. But anyway, let's get on to what I actually thought. I liked it. I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it. I thought it had a fairly solid plot, and I really liked the storyline, particularly in the middle. I wasn't very crazy about the way it ended, and I'm even a little hesitant to go into the next book. I probably will, but I'm not super invested in it, whereas like when I first started this book, I was surprised by how much I actually was enjoying it, and by the end I was like, I don't know. I think that I definitely see where people like this, because it does, like I said, it does have a pretty good storyline, but it wasn't like amazing, it wasn't great. It was decent. It was likable. I only gave it 3 stars. Like I said, I don't know if I'm actually going to read the next one. I'm going to kind of wait and see how people reviewed the second one, I think, before I decide if I'm going to read it. But that was how I ended the month. So that's it for my October and November wrap up. I'm very tired now. That was a lot. Let me know down in the comments, out of the books I read, which one is your favorite? And also let me know down in the comments what your favorite book of the year is, since I've already discovered what mine is. And that will be it for this video, and I will see you guys next time with another one. Bye.